Welcome into the Sportsmemo podcast, the Every Game on the Board college football edition podcast with our first guest, Robbie Veno. Rob, welcome into the podcast. How are you?
I am doing great, Drew. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Probably not as good as you're doing, man. Let me just throw out a couple records here, Robbie. Got to pat your back a little bit. Overall, college football, 58%. That's every single play, up 18 units on the year. And the big plays, the 4 and 5% plays, the more heavily weighted plays, Robbie, is 28 and 14. 67% on the year. That's the full year. No cherry picking numbers. And unit scale, you're up over 20 units, Rob. Just real quick, what are you doing differently, or maybe the same that's working? I mean, obviously you're seeing it clearly, Robbie.
Yeah, and it helps to have weeks like what we just went through this past weekend, Drew. 7-0 in college football totals, 11-2 in college football overall last week. Certainly you need big weeks to maintain high percentages, but it's nice. It's nice when when the results absolutely mirror the work that you put in and come out the way you saw them on paper. So last week was one of those weeks that really didn't have a total play last week that ever came into question. They were all fairly easy winners. So we're going to look to repeat that again this week. Obviously, that's the job every single week. But I think with the extensive, a number of days, consecutive days that we get college football now, that helps too, because you can sit down the first 4 days of the week with anywhere from a 1 to 5 play card and really get in depth, and the Saturday card gets shortened up a little bit. So maybe that's an added bonus for me.
Well, how's it feel, Robbie? I mean, getting out of bed's a little easier, your wife's a little prettier, the kids are a little nicer. I mean, all that happening?
They're always all that, Drew, whether it's good or bad. Thank goodness for that too. But I would say that, and I think I speak for most handicappers and bettors, that off of good weeks, the inspiration to go at it even harder and faster comes into play almost all the time. I mean, you do have some tendency, and I've been real good throughout my career to avoid this, but I know that off of losing weeks, sometimes you don't feel like getting to those updated power ratings as fast. You don't feel like getting to next week's schedule as fast. I've been pretty good at shaking it off throughout my career, but I tell you what, off of winning weeks, you can't wait to get going for the next one. So that's probably the biggest positive.
Well, congratulations to you, Robbie. And before we get into the first game here, Ball State, Toledo, we also got Ohio, Western Michigan. We're going down to game number 332. This is the first part of 4 parts of this week's college football Every Game on the Board. We got a special coupon code, Veno40, that's Veno 40, no spaces when you're checking out, for 40% off any all access to do with Robbie Veno, any college football the rest of the year. Anything on sportsmemo.com is 40% off with Veno40 as you're checking out. Robbie, we got one game here Wednesday night. We're getting this up, about 4 o'clock Eastern time, 1 o'clock Pacific. So if somebody's listening on Wednesday, they'll get it in. Maybe be a little quicker with this one, but we got 7:30 tonight. Ball State at Toledo, 65 the total. Toledo laying 19 at home. Riley Neal, I guess he's out. Ball State last year fell off a cliff when he left. You see that happening again this year?
Yeah, it really happened last week too when he went out of the game, Drew. Drew Plitt, the sophomore quarterback, comes in to replace him. Now, this is a guy who had 3 starts last year, so he's not foreign to being on the field. But certainly the numbers weren't pretty last week in that loss that they had. He's going to start tonight. We'll see. For the season, 18 of 29, 62%, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. I don't think that bodes well. Obviously, Toledo's defense has not been good all season long, and you would prefer, if you're a Ball State backer, to have Riley Neal on the field. But I could see the numbers falling off offensively for Ball State here. Quarterback issues don't begin and end with Ball State, though. Toledo has some of their own. Mitchell Guadagni, with his shoulder injury, is, last check, Drew, that I had about 90 minutes ago, still on the questionable side. It seems as if we're going to see sophomore Eli Peters. This would be his 3rd start of the season. He's been on the field a little bit more than Plitt, so that's a positive for Toledo. They've been used to having him as their starting quarterback somewhat because Guadagni suffered multiple injuries this year. 9 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions, good numbers there. The percentage isn't that great, 47.1% completion. Peters doesn't necessarily bring as much of a running threat to the game as Guadagni does at the quarterback position, so that probably hinders Toledo somewhat. A couple of quick numbers here. Ball State, not only might the offense suffer here without their starting quarterback, but they're 0-4 against the spread their last 4 games, and the last 2 were not close because the defense has thoroughly let them down. 974 total yards and 94 points allowed in their last 2 games. Toledo, at that rapid pace that they run, number 9 in the country in offensive possessions per game. So you could see Toledo maybe doing some damage to that Ball State defense, which seems to be deteriorating. It's an important game for Toledo. We went through this last week on our podcast, how they were chasing from the bottom of the West standings. That was a huge win over Western Michigan last week. They'll get a crack at Northern Illinois next week. Still a couple of games behind in the loss column behind Northern Illinois, but Toledo's in that fight now to try and get to the MAC championship. So you have to expect 100% fully focused effort out of them tonight.
Robbie, we'll go to the Thursday card here. We got Ohio at Western Michigan. Ohio open pick'em, now laying 2.5, pretty much across the board. Actually seeing a 3 pop up right now at Bookmaker. So taking some big money here, 64 the total. I think a lot of it has to do with what the kid's last name starts with a W, the quarterback for Western Michigan, I believe. He's questionable, if not out. What do you got on Ohio, Western Michigan?
Yeah, John Wasink. He will not play. The ankle injury now, last week we didn't know how severe it was, but now it looks like he's out indefinitely. The good news is, that game last week between Toledo and Western Michigan, I had a play on that total, so you get to see the backup quarterback in that game. True freshman Caleb Ellaby, who came in and really played fantastic for Western Michigan. They just got outscored by Toledo in that contest. But last week, Ellaby goes 23 of 28, 293 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. I know Toledo's not the greatest defense in the world, but Ohio's is worse. Ohio sits at number 100 in the nation right now in total defense. And let's just, Drew, sometimes numbers don't correlate to other numbers, and it forces us handicappers and bettors to make decisions on which way we think things will go. We have to project a little bit. But how about these numbers out of the Ohio U defense the last 4 games? Only gave up 26 points to Kent total. But Kent got 472 yards. 472 yards and 26 points to me don't correlate. Should have been more points scored by Kent. Give up 24 points to Northern Illinois. 400 total yards. The 400 total yards they gave up to Northern Illinois are the most total yards Northern Illinois has gained all season long against any opponent. 14 points allowed, 314 total yards to Bowling Green. That was the transition game. Mike Jinks out, Carl Pelini in. Bowling Green looked a little scattered offensively in that game, as they did last night too. So ever since Carl Pelini's become head coach, they haven't looked as good offensively. And then finally last week, 14 points allowed, but Riley Neal gets knocked out early second quarter. So the point I'm trying to get to here is these points allowed look really, really good defensively, like Ohio U's making defensive strides, but I don't know that they are. I would say Western Michigan, even with the true freshman who showed a lot of poise last weekend as a dual-threat quarterback, can certainly poke some holes in the Ohio U defense. Totals, I think, sits at like 65 right now. I'm not staring at it right in front of me.
65.
But
there is a 64 out there.
And I think that that's attainable with these 2 squads. Western Michigan back-to-back home games off the embarrassment last week probably comes back with a better effort.
Robbie, moving down the card, we got Northern Illinois at Akron. Northern Illinois laying 6, 37.5 the total. Robbie, I don't know how Akron's going to score any points. If I was taking bets and setting a team total on Akron, I think I'd put it at like 9.5. I wouldn't want any over money on them. Northern Illinois' defense is pretty good. Akron's offense is terrible. Not that there's going to be a lot of points anyway. I mean, we're seeing a college football Maction total sitting at 37. How do you look to bet this one, man?
Yeah, I'm with you, Drew. And when you add into that mix the fact that there's a 100% chance of rain throughout the entire 4-hour contest, how is Akron going to score? They're not going to be able to run the football on the Northern Illinois defense. Chances are they won't be able to pass it either. Akron only averages $122 on the ground. Northern Illinois only allows 112 on the ground. So the running game's negated here for Akron totally. To put the ball in the hands of their passing game in 4 hours worth of rain, I just don't know that that's a successful recipe for points scored for the Akron Zips. Northern Illinois 7-1 under the total for game wagering so far this season, and 7-1 under the total for first half wagering this year, 14-2 combined. You would expect a low scoring game anyway, because Northern Illinois' offense is not any juggernaut by any means. Add to that, Akron's 2-5 under the total in game wagering this season. Akron's 1-5-1 in first half under wagering this season. And you could see where I'm going here. The points would appear to be few and far between. Northern Illinois, the only thing that would probably concern me a hair, Drew, is that every single Northern Illinois game total has gotten to 40 or better, and we're looking at 37 here, has gotten to 40 or better except their game against Utah, which is understandable, and their game against BYU last week, which wound up 7-6, also understandable because of the way BYU plays defense. But Akron's offense, Northern Illinois' defense, the rain, Northern Illinois' lousy offense. I can't play under 37, but I wouldn't play over either.
Robbie, this is my first bet I've ever bet an under 40 in college football. So
it's crazy.
Yeah,
I'm with you, buddy.
All right, we got Temple UCF. This is a game I'm excited to watch. 61 the total. Looks like UCF 10.5 across the board now. I think Temple's a lot better than people are giving credit. However, UCF is just a train I don't want to step anywhere in front of. How do you look at this one?
Yeah, let's. I broke this one down pretty well. First of all, it's a battle for first place in the American Athletic Conference East Division. Both of these teams come in 4-0. The first and most important thing to note is everything I read now indicates that Mackenzie Milton will start this game. He's taken all the first team reps in practice this week. Reports say he's been throwing the ball around on a dime 40 yards downfield. Even completed a Hail Mary 65 yards downfield. So Mackenzie Milton, obviously, that's where you have to begin this handicap. He's in the game. The ankle injury, though, could affect how he runs, Drew. His overall effectiveness totally depends on the fact that he can run on these design quarterback runs as well as throw the football. So we'll see how mobile he is. I haven't gotten a good read on that yet, but the fact that he's playing is good news. Temple's defense, let's get into it real quick here. The opposing offenses that they've played, this is how you have to break these numbers down. You can't just stare at overall numbers and say, wow, that's a great defense. Opposing offenses that Temple has faced, only two of those, in my estimation and statistically, are competent multi-dimensional offenses. Those two were Buffalo and Boston College. Buffalo put 36 points and 427 yards on the Temple defense. BC put 45 points and 423 total yards on the Temple defense. That's 90 points allowed. That's 81 points allowed. They've only given up 90 to their other six opponents combined. To show you how one-dimensional or offensively challenged, pick your choice, either one in all cases, the other six opponents have been. Listen, Buffalo and BC are good offensively. They're not Central Florida. So I don't know how good the Temple defense is. I think with Mackenzie Milton back, UCF does their job on offense. Question for me would be, can Temple match points with them? For them, Raquel Armstead, their top running back, he's a question mark too, Drew, and that's as important as Mackenzie Milton is to the other side, because Armstead's gained 626 rushing yards this week, 5.1 a carry, averages $104 a game. How about the backups? The next closest backup to Armstead, Jagger Gardner, he averages 3.1 a carry and only has 157 rushing yards, 500 less. And he's gotten some attempts. He's gotten 50 attempts. It shows you how the level of Temple's running game sinks without Armstead. The number's not even worth going into. Below Gardner, not good, obviously. The number 2 and number 3 running backs combined for Temple, put them together, they only gain 40 rushing yards a game. So I think that's troublesome. Check the status of Armstead before you play this game. Temple has improved a little bit, throwing the football down the field vertically. They do make some plays down there. But quarterback Anthony Russo, how about 10 interceptions and 9 TDs? So for as many big plays as he makes, he does take some back and give them to the other team. Inconsistency is not going to help here. Both teams pretty good at protecting the quarterback. If Armstead doesn't play, Drew, I'd be on UCF.
Okay, and Robbie, do you put any credence into UCF 4 straight games under the total?
There's justification. I mean, in your mind, you can make justification for a couple of them. I'll tell you this, Drew, if you just break them down as a first half and second half team, you see the numbers dwindle as far as total is concerned in the second half. For instance, they're 2-5 over-under in the second half of games this season, only averaging 20 points in the second half. Is it like an Alabama situation where they take the foot off the pedal? Probably not, because UCF runs the up-tempo offense consistently. But I do think that, Milton comes out in big leads, and some of the teams they play just aren't that good. So I don't know if I would put a lot of credence into the totals here. We'll see how this one goes. I'll say this: UCF is 3-0 straight up at home, and they haven't been on their home field in almost a month. They're going to get their next 3 games all at home, which should help them out. Certainly they're a better team in South Florida, and you got the Temple going from east down south aspect to handicap in here too.
Yeah, it should be a good one. I mean, the UCF, they're going to try to put some style points on here to make, get in the conversation here with the playoffs. So, I'm not looking to bet Temple either, but I just think Temple's a little underrated, won 6 straight ATS, so it's something I haven't touched yet. Let's move on to the Friday card. We got 3:15, 3:16. Pitt at Virginia. Surprising the Virginia Cavaliers this year. They've been pretty good. 48 the total. Laying now 7.5. This is a good one to shop around. Make sure if you're looking to bet Virginia, you'd grab the 7. If you're looking to bet Pitt, go to a sports book with 7.5. You're getting both those numbers out there, Robbie. How do you look to bet this ACC matchup?
Yeah, it's another one where we have to really take the rain into consideration here, Drew. Anywhere from 83 to 99% chance of rain throughout this game, so it's going to be wet. No doubt about it. There's huge implications here. Pitt's made a little bit of a rally in the ACC Coastal Division. Virginia sits in first at 4-1, but how about Pitt at 3-1? If you weren't looking at the standings, you probably wouldn't know that without looking at the standings. So they've been quietly coming back here, 3 straight covers. Remember last year, I think Pittsburgh covered their last 4 games of the season, and if you extend that number out, I believe they were like 5-1 or 6-1 to end the year, but I know for sure they were 4-0 to end the year. They closed real strong, and it looks like they're starting to do that here again this year. But Virginia's been on that point spread roll all season long, 7-1 against the numbers, so they've been a definite ticket casher. They've helped people's bankrolls, those that have been willing to go to the window with Virginia every single week. Key matchup here, it's real easy. Can Pitt run the football against Virginia? It's strength versus strength for Pittsburgh. They got the 22nd ranked rushing attack in the nation, 228 rushing yards per game. But Virginia stifles the run. Their 20th ranked run defense only gives up 113 rushing yards per game. So that's where, the ram horns batter one another, so to speak. And breaking down Virginia's rushing numbers, though, Drew, and again, if you just take their 113 allowed and their 20th ranked rushing defense and walk away with that and don't get inside the numbers, maybe you miss this. They played North Carolina State. NC State ranks 111th in rushing this year. They gained 176 yards, 4.5 a carry against Virginia. Indiana's the 80th ranked rushing offense in the nation. 237 rushing yards, 5.4 per carry. Miami of Florida, 54th in the nation, 149 yards rushing, 5.1 per carry. All 3 of those would indicate to you that if you have any sense of being able to move the football, any ability to move the football on the ground, you could do it against Virginia. So that kind of contradicts their overall rushing number. However, Virginia shut down Ohio U. Ohio U's the 15th best rushing team in the country, and Virginia only allowed them $118 on 3.9 a carry. I would say to that one game, that was a game moved due to the hurricane to Nashville. Both teams were disrupted during the week, so maybe that's a bit of a mirage. But games where Virginia really shut down rushing attacks were Duke, Louisville, and UNC. None of those teams gained even 67 yards rushing in their contest. All three ranked 70th or worse. This is an interesting matchup, Drew. I think the game begins and ends there. With that, if Pitt can't run, it's probably lights out for them because they can't throw the football. How about this? In modern-day college football, passing for 200 yards is kind of a foregone conclusion for almost every team. Pitt hasn't thrown for over $175 this year in any game. So if they can't run it, they're not going to start throwing it here against Virginia. It's not like they're an option team where they only pass 6-8 times a game. They pass 24 times a game and still can't do it. I think the dual threat quarterback here, Bryce Perkins for Virginia, has been a godsend for this team. We've talked about the offensive scheme switch a lot this year, but Perkins has been great. When Pittsburgh has faced dual threat quarterbacks this year, Trace McSorley of Penn State, they gave up 42 points. Mackenzie Milton of UCF, they gave up 45 points. Eric Dungy of Syracuse, they gave up 37 points. None of those came in overtime in that game. They were all in regulation. So you get the drift here. They have trouble with dual threat quarterbacks that are competent. They might have trouble with Perkins here. The problem for Perkins and Virginia might be the rain, Drew. We'll see how that affects this one.
So it's what are the chances of rain in Charlottesville? Pretty high?
They're huge. From the start of the game, it's 83%. Through the game, it's 99%. So it's going to rain. And it's not going to stop at any given point. So they play on synthetic surface, but still, it's could factor in certainly in the passing game.
Does it make you look towards the under 48 in this?
Well, the problem with rain is that rain sometimes forces turnovers. A lot of fumbles with a slippery ball. Quarterbacks get stripped. So it's hard to just blindly say under in those instances, too. You kind of have to look at how aggressive the defenses are. Virginia certainly has been an aggressive defense so far this season. And speaking of blindly, real quick, I'll add one more thing. Virginia, just walk up to the window. Bet them for the game. Bet them for the first half. Bet them for the second half. You're 19-4. This year with one push, so they have absolutely cashed a ton of tickets.
Robbie, let's move to the Conference USA matchup. We got Western Kentucky versus MTSU. That's Middle Tennessee. 53 the total with MTSU, Stockstill and Company laying 13.5 at home.
Yeah, WKU, they're not covering games lately. They're 0-3 against the spread. Found that weird way to lose to Old Dominion a couple of weeks ago, but they're helping over bettors out because they're 3-0 over the total last three games. A lot of it due to the fact that they found some new offense here, and the odds makers just haven't adjusted their totals very much. The defense for Western Kentucky's gone south for sure. They allowed 40 points to Charlotte, right? 37 to Old Dominion, which Old Dominion can score, and then 38 last week to FIU. So the defense is deteriorating as the season goes on. That's to be expected of any of these group of five mid-rung teams. You just don't have the depth to withstand the constant pounding of the season. So the defense has gone away. And MTSU, I'm not going to say they rediscovered their offense last week, Drew, because a couple of their TDs were on interception returns. One went 100 yards for a touchdown. But they did score 37 points, and they did average 6.9 yards per play, which is the highest that they've averaged all season long. We've talked at length about how MTSU has become a dink and dunk type of offense. Last week, 37.6.9 per play. Okay, maybe the Stockstill and Company are coming around somewhat. And against a defense like Western Kentucky, which is not playing well toward the end of the season, you could see them generating some points and yards in this contest. The other side of the coin is MTSU's defense was shredded last week. 520 allowed yardage-wise to Old Dominion in that game. Just not good. I think both of these defenses are vulnerable no matter what you want to do. They'll give it up versus the run. They'll give it up versus the pass. Neither team runs it well, so the key might be whichever team runs it the best wins the game. To that point, you go and check Western Kentucky out, and you find that DeAndre Furby, their number one running back, came back last week, which is a big plus for that team. Didn't do much last week, but expect him to do some damage this week. And the offensive line play that's been so miserable all season long is getting a lot of raves as far as their improvement throughout the season is concerned. And Western Kentucky, Drew, you look for teams that are out of bowl contention at this time of year and kind of sort through and see which ones are just going to give up, roll over. They don't care. Western Kentucky's not one of those teams. I mean, there were some quotes from quarterback Davis Shanley this week where they're more excited to play games now than they were early on because they think they're healthier and they're more equipped offensively. Like I said, 3 straight overs. This one sits at 53, which is, like I say, bookmakers aren't making any adjustments to WKU right now. You could get some value there. Shanley's going to start this game. I know Duncan came in for him last week, but Shanley will start, and maybe 53 is a good place to go and play over.
Robbie, let's head out west to the Pac-12. We got Colorado at Arizona, 58 the total. Arizona, I was starting to fade them, Robbie, and then they started winning, I'll tell you. But laying 3 at home in Tucson, little juice on that. How would you look to bet Colorado, Arizona?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in play here, and I think fundamentally there's a nice little hand-in-glove matchup here that could project to a lot of points scored in this game. And simply put, Colorado's defense last week, they faced a freshman quarterback last week, third string, because of injuries to Oregon State's top 2 guys. Second half, Oregon State brings their number 1 into the game, Jake Luton. He was well enough to go second half, and boy, was he good enough to go, because he walks in and absolutely shredded that Colorado defense. I think they had 320 passing yards in the second half. You saw OSU's fourth quarter last week that led to overtime and the victory, all caused by a competent throwing quarterback coming in and shredding the CU secondary. Now, if you put that together with what we saw from Khalil Tate last week, quarterback of Arizona, who all season long has been injured, but to my eyes, he looked as good and as healthy as he's looked all season long against Oregon. We can attribute maybe some of Oregon's play last week to the letdown factor, losing the week before, and, thus losing any hope of winning the Pac-12 North. But Tate looked good, and the offense responded. The offense gains 465 yards last week. They put up 44 points. Tate versus this Colorado defense, I think, can do some damage. This might be, we talked last week about breaking the season into thirds. This final third, some teams are surging, some teams are falling back. It looks to me like Kevin Sumlin's group might be surging offensively, kind of the offensive play we expected out of them all season long. We're getting that now. But their defense is no better, Drew. The defense is lousy, to say the least, and Steven Montez, dual-threat quarterback for CU, he got a pass weapon back last week. Jay McIntyre, one of their wide receivers, came back and played. He threw well, 319 yards. Check the status of Laviska Shenault Jr., obviously one of the top playmaking weapons in the country, has sat the last 2 weeks, but it looks like he's probably going to get in there this week. Head coach Mike McIntyre used the word hopefully. We'll see if hopefully turns into definitely, but I think Shenault will probably get out there. If he does, trouble for the Arizona defense. Like I say, they're lousy at best. And how about the play of Trayvon McMillan, the Virginia Tech transfer at running back? Been real good for CU. Like I say, there's a lot of fundamental things here that just kind of fit hand in glove with points scored being the final outcome. So I think this number, it's gone down. I think it's just an overreaction again, Drew. We saw it last week, right? Shenault doesn't play. Oregon State's quarterback doesn't start, and that total got absolutely punished. Down. The game went way over. Overtime did help, but the fourth quarter got it over anyway. Same thing this week. Opens 58.5. We see 57, 56.5 because of Shenault. I don't know that it's that big of a deal to knock it down, but if Shenault plays, this total is going to go way back up. So if you like the over, get it now.
We'll move on to the Saturday card here. And, guys, we're talking to Robbie Veno. Red hot Robbie Veno, 7-0 college football totals. Red hot weekend overall, even in the NFL. And got his 4 and 5% plays, 28 and 14, 67% on the year. You can use coupon code VENO40 when checking out for 40% off anything Rob Veno service-wise from Sportsmemo.com. Robbie, Saturday's card, we got 3-2-1, 3-2-2 at the top here, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific kick. Houston at SMU. Houston laying 14 or 13.5 on the road, 71 the total.
Yeah, this Kendall Briles offense is becoming ridiculous. They're just scoring at will. They haven't played a single game this year where they scored less than 41 points. SMU, defensively, let's give him some credit. Sonny Dykes is known for the air raid offense. He's not necessarily known for coming into programs and making their defenses better. And I don't even know if he's even a third, a tenth, a hundredth responsible for the defense being better. Could be all on first-year defensive coordinator Kevin Kane here. But SMU's played better defense lately, Drew. Tulane is Cincinnati, not the greatest offenses in the world, but they did hold them to 23 and 26 points. They're not going to hold Houston. Again, the situation in front of them is going to require scoring 40 points. The offense hasn't been great, but Houston's defense is miserable. Just go through that. I think that pass defense still ranks last in the nation right now. So Ben Hicks and company, a couple of weeks ago against Tulane, we made the point on the podcast to telling the audience that SMU got a whole trio of starting wide receivers back for that game. So they're at full strength here, wide receiver-wise. They're going to attack the Houston defense. There's a bit of a rivalry, obviously, SMU and Houston here. And I could see SMU certainly scoring their share in this contest, which to me would make the points worth taking. Ed Oliver, his status, check it out. Defensive tackle for Houston. He did not play last week. Whether or not he's going to be involved this week, I'm not totally positive at this point here on Wednesday afternoon. But certainly 14 points, SMU at home with Houston's pass defense. Houston gives up numbers. They just outscore people. SMU might be a live home dog here.
Robbie, we moved to the Big Ten. We got Iowa at Purdue, 51 the total. Looks like Purdue laying 2.5 or 3, so another good one to shop around. Purdue's laying 2.5 or 3 at home. How would you look to bet this Big Ten matchup?
Yeah, it's a bounce-back effort for both teams, right? Drew, disappointing losses last week. For Iowa, it's the 30-24 loss to Penn State, where they were inside the 10-yard line at the end of the game, looked like they were going to go in for the winning score. They get picked. They lose the game. Certainly disappointing for Kirk Ferentz and his troops. For Purdue, you don't even face Brian Lewerke, and you get rolled by Michigan State in that contest 23-13. Michigan State, a team that had horrendous pass defense numbers coming in, one of the best, if not the best. They could still be ranked number one in the nation as far as rush defense is concerned, but they're way up there. But they can't play the pass, or haven't been able to play the pass. Opponents have been able to make a lot of yardage through the air against Michigan State. Purdue just couldn't do enough. 23-13 loss. So they play at home. I would give a slight advantage to Purdue there. Again, I really like listening to head coach Jeff Brom in his Monday conference calls. He gives a lot of good insight into the team. They're going to be ready, but so is Iowa going to be ready. I think Purdue gets the advantage here because they're at home. I think Iowa gets the advantage because they're so superior on the defensive side, and I just don't know that Rondale Moore and this Purdue deep downfield passing attack are going to get the amount of plays that they've been accustomed to getting. Last week against Michigan State might have shown it. When you go back and look and see that they scored 49 against Ohio State, hasn't played great defense, 46 against Illinois, miserable on defense, 42 against Nebraska, miserable on defense, Boston College, not quite the Boston College of years gone by on the defensive side, and then 37 against Missouri, you start to ask yourself, maybe all it takes to slow these guys down and slow David Blau down is a really sound defense. Iowa's got it on all three levels. If they were home, I'd really be on them. I still think I might get there with Iowa in this game just because I think they're the better all-around team.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like that defensive matchup for the Hawkeyes. Let's move to the Sun Belt, Robbie. We got 3-2-5, 3-2-6. Texas State, the Bobcats at the Georgia State Panthers. Looks like 52 the total with Georgia State 5.5 point favorites. Not too much. You see GSU laying almost a touchdown, Robbie. But which way would you look to bet Texas State, Georgia State?
Yeah, how often do we get to use defensive. I shouldn't use the word prowess. I can't do it.
Yeah.
But Texas State's been really good defensively, Drew. I mean, as you know, both of us followers of the Sun Belt Conference, they can't really play defense, right? But certainly the last 3 weeks. I mean, it started with that Georgia Southern game a few weeks back where they just stuffed that running game. They lose 15-13. The worst rushing performance by Georgia Southern all season long. And it's because Texas State's defense held them down. I figure that's a mirage. They'll come back. They'll get lit up by UL Monroe. Not the case. Hold UL Monroe to 20. Lose another close game, 20-14, because the offense has been inept all season long. Last week against a pass-happy, air raid-style New Mexico State offense, they hold New Mexico State to 20 and get the win. They've just been good on the defensive side of the football recently, and they've been good at keeping teams out of the end zone for sure, turning drives into field goals. It's an advantage here against Georgia State, which just doesn't play the same type of defense. This is really a contrast in teams here because Georgia State far superior on offense, Texas State superior on defense. But like I say, those last 3 games, Drew, those are good offensive teams. I mean, slowing Georgia Southern down, their running game down, nobody's been able to really accomplish that on this season except for, I think, Clemson and Texas State. Monroe, we know a pretty good offensive team with Caleb Evans, and of course New Mexico State had been red hot throwing the football around. So I could see, people leaning towards the Texas State side. I could certainly understand that. Georgia State plays little to no defense whatsoever, so maybe Everett Withers' crew can score enough like they did against New Mexico State last week and get a win here.
Robbie, moving to the ACC now. We got Syracuse at Wake Forest. Looks like Syracuse laying 5 on the road, 75 the total.
And if we thought that the Syracuse-NC State game last week was just a ping-pong match up and down the field, how about this? Syracuse ranks number 1 in the nation as far as possessions per game are concerned. They almost get the ball 16 times a game. That's how fast they go. They're number 1. Wake Forest is number 9. That offense moves at warp speed as well. They get about 15 and a half possessions per game. So you've got 2 extremely efficient, extremely fast offenses working against the defenses here. And, you just wonder who's going to stop who. Wake Forest had no trouble slicing up Louisville last week. Syracuse is a little different animal. They're a little bit better on the defensive side, but we saw last week they can be carved up as well. Total indicates everything I'm saying, Drew. So you're certainly not going to cash in on a whole ton of value here. But I will say this, 75 in a game between teams like this, 75 could be seen as a value play from over guys, going to the window and taking this one over the total. Don't see much weather problems or many weather problems in this one. Should be a pretty good day in North Carolina. So dry track. 2 offenses that are just going to go out there and go up and down the field. 75, they might make it look a little bit small. You're asking for 38 a team here. I think you definitely get it out of Syracuse. Remember how decimated Wake Forest is on the defensive side, especially at the linebacker position. Head coach Dave Clawson has let us know that for the last 3 weeks. And is certainly the play of Wake Forest and their top playmaker Greg Dortch capable of lighting up Syracuse.
Robbie, my favorite matchup of the weekend, we got SEC East Championship here. Georgia at Kentucky. This one in Lexington. Looks like Georgia laying 9 or 8 and anywhere in between. So good one to shop around. We got 44 the total. So low scoring game here, and also it should be a good matchup. I mean, unless Georgia runs away with this. How do you see Georgia-Kentucky, Robbie?
Well, the first thing is I have no idea how Kentucky got out of Columbia, Missouri with a win last week. I mean, that game was done, sealed, delivered, finished, and somehow, some way, Kentucky used a punt return late in that contest. They used the fact that Missouri didn't convert a third down in the second half. And, that shouldn't be considered as a negative there because you have to, without question, praise the Kentucky defense for being able to hold Drew Lock in that explosive offense without a third down. Some of the fault lies with Missouri's O, but a lot of the success in that number goes back to how good the Kentucky defense is. Josh Allen and that defense, very physical. We've talked about him a lot this year. But that being said, then they have to go on an 89-yard march if they're going to win the game and score a touchdown because Mizzou punted them down to the 11-yard line. And what do? And Kentucky can't gain 89 yards on an empty field. And they gain 89 yards with help of penalties and win that contest. So I don't know how they got here, but they did. I think that we see the offense, without question, Drew, is fraudulent. I mean, Texas A&M, they score 14. Vanderbilt, they score 14. Last week, Missouri, they score 15. Vanderbilt and Missouri are not good defense. We talked about how many consecutive weeks in a row Vandy had allowed 500 total yards offense up until that Kentucky game. Then all of a sudden they learned how to play defense. So to me, they're not a match for Georgia. I think it's a great story, Mark Stoops, and certainly they're well improved, but they're nowhere near the elite level. And even though they're home, I think it probably comes crashing down this week. UGA has been real good on the defensive side of the football as well. Don't expect much to be scored by Kentucky. They'd have to force turnovers that turn immediately into points for me to think otherwise. But for me right now, it would be Georgia and no other way.
Guys, we got one game left here, and remember the coupon code Veno40 for 40% off. Anything to do with Rob Veno, all access on Sportsmemo.com. Hitting 58% overall in college football and 67% on the 4- and 5-star plays. That's the top-rated plays at Sportsmemo.com. He's 28 and 14 on those. Veno40 for 40% off when checking out. Robbie, last game here, 3-3-1, 3-3-2 before we bring in Teddy Covers early on Thursday morning to start us off with Nebraska-Ohio State. But this one's Navy at Cincinnati, 49.5 the total. Looks like Cincy laying 13 at home.
You know, for Cincinnati, that Central Florida Temple game looms large. Obviously, all three of these teams are in the battle for that AAC East Division. Somebody's losing that Temple UCF game, which would bring them right down to Cincinnati's one-loss level. If it happens to be Temple who loses, Cincinnati gets their chance against Central Florida later on this season. I'm not quite sure how the tiebreaker system, if it became 3 teams in the AAC, would work. But in the round robin, obviously Cincinnati would have a win over Central Florida if it were to end in a tie with all three having one loss, and they would have a loss to Temple. So it would probably get a little complicated. But still, for Cincy, the chance to win the division and make it to the AAC championship are still there. So I wouldn't expect them to slow down here in this contest against Navy. Navy's real dependent upon the run. We know that. Cincinnati's been a real good run defense so far this season. Question is, can they play the triple option here? It's so tough, Drew. Tulane runs a form, Willie Fritz's form of triple option, and Cincinnati won that game against Tulane 37-21 and held Tulane to 266 yards total in that contest, 134 on the ground and only 3.5 per rush. So if we use that as a gauge, we're not going to say that Tulane is as good at the triple option as Navy is, but still, those are numbers that could lead you toward the Cincinnati side here and say that Luke Fickell's defense has seen it once, been successful against it once. Navy's down this year. Perhaps Cincinnati can hold Navy in check on the ground as well and force them to have to do some damage through the air. Cincinnati's offense is always a problem point, a sticking point here when you go to play them in games because they just don't get any better offensively. And laying 13 to me, 13.5 in some instances, just out of the question. I know Navy's down this year, but you're not going to get me to lay 13.5 points with a Cincinnati team that, you know, might barely make it to 20. Who knows? So for me, probably the underdog. I won't get involved. Don't like the total play here either. A game that I, in all likelihood, won't have a ticket on this week.
All right, Robbie, we got you back on tomorrow and Friday, right?
We do. We do. More college and then the NFL.
Well, good stuff, man. Enjoy Maction Halloween tonight with the family. Everybody out there, happy Halloween. And we'll be back tomorrow morning with Teddy Covers, Kyle Hunter, and Robbie Veno to finish off college football every game on the board. Best of luck with your bets.